there is a ballot for the board of directors. And included in there is a ballot on a recall. This comes from a listener of ours who was out, I think, in Oregon, who listens to the program, did his own homework, and realized instead of pressuring the NRA to drop him, which they can't do, the way you have to do it is through a recall and through a vote. So the NRA did it the right way. Now it is in the hands of the members of the NRA. Vote yes to recall Grover Norquist. But there is just this little explanation, his side and, the truth, as I view it, in the magazine, and people really need to know viscerally why this guy is so dangerous at the NRA or elsewhere. Frank, can you give us the thumbnail snapshot of Grover Norquist?
I'll try. It's a long story, but let me try to condense it for your listeners. First, just a point of clarification, Glenn. I believe it is only lifetime members of the NRA and 5-year members who actually get this ballot and get to vote. But there's supposed to be something like 2 million of them, all told. Okay. What they're being asked to consider, and I think you put it exactly right, is whether to save the NRA. Save the NRA the embarrassment, save the NRA the association with someone who has done, I believe, extraordinary harm to our country over a long period of time. Like you, Glenn, I frankly wouldn't have believed this myself. I'd known Grover for many years as a leading anti-tax activist with the Americans for Tax Reform. I had, however, an extraordinary opportunity to see what was going on, because for 7, I think of them as biblically long years, I shared office space with Grover Norquist. And about a month after we moved in, this is 1999, one of my colleagues came to me and said, "Do you know that there's a Muslim Brotherhood front on the other side of that Xerox room?" Which, by the way, we happen to share. And from that day forward, till the present moment, really, I've had opportunities to observe and analyze. My background is in national security, and it was perhaps providential, that's all I can say, that I had a chance to see what he was doing. But basically, this was it. I think in the name of facilitating an approach that his friend Karl Rove, at the time was a chief strategist for George W. Bush, then in the process of beginning to run for president in 2000, an outreach to the Muslim community seemed in order. And Rover reached out all right, but the people he reached out to were known Muslim Brotherhood operatives. And that's a term that may not mean a lot to folks. I think to your listeners that's probably not so. But just to qualify this, we have known, Glenn, since 2004, that the Muslim Brotherhood's mission in the United States, according to a secret plan that came into our possession, again, providentially, their mission is to destroy Western civilization from within by, as they put it, our hands and the hands of the believers, so that God's religion can be made victorious over all other religions. Their technique is not, at least in this country, and at least for the moment, the violent kind of jihad that we've seen in so many other places, and occasionally, unfortunately, here too. Rather, it's something they call civilization jihad. It's a sort of stealthy, subversive penetration and influence operation against our civil society institutions and governing agencies. And the thing that's so important to understand about what Grover Norquist did, and I believe is continuing to do for Islamic supremacists, not just of the Muslim Brotherhood stripe, he's also worked with people who've been working for and with the Iranians as well, the Shiites, is to enable that civilization jihad to be waged against the conservative movement and the Republican Party, notably, but not exclusively, the campaign of George W. Bush in 2000 and the presidency of George W. Bush thereafter, and, as I say, in other ways, ever since.
Now, I think that, as I've tried to figure out why Grover Norquist would do this, and I think you're right, that it started out on a way that, look, the Democrats have the Jewish people, they have the African-American vote. The Republicans need to have some minorities here just to be able to capture those votes. It was really truly all about money and votes. And in that, he got tangled up in these guys. Now, that is the way I think, and this is pure speculation, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, Frank, but I think that's the way it started. But the problem is, once he found out that he was hanging around people that went to prison for terrorism and terrorist charges, he still defends. He still is not. He's not a guy who woke up and said, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea." He's still fighting this and claiming that he has nothing to do with these kinds of people, and that many of these people are still good people, and they're not.
That's for sure. I'm not sure how it began. I think that was the sort of, cover story, at the very least. It helped justify what he was doing. We've learned in recent months that his sister actually had married a Palestinian Islamist back in the mid-1980s. And it may have been that, some of his interest in outreach to this particular kind of Muslim was piqued by that. I just don't know. What we do know is that the appeal that was made by him to Karl Rove and to George W. Bush to bring them Muslim community leaders, Muslim votes, was facilitated by a guy who had worked at the right hand of a fellow that you alluded to a moment ago, a man now convicted and serving hard time in Supermax for terrorism-related charges. That man was named Abdurrahman al-Amoudi, and his right-hand man, Khalid Safouri, worked with Grover Norquist in this Muslim Brotherhood Front organization across the Xerox room from my offices to promote so-called free market initiatives in the Muslim community and otherwise give Muslims access to the Bush campaign. And interestingly enough, this fellow, Khalid Safouri, the right-hand man for quite some time of a jihadist, make no mistake about it. We actually know that he was not only a top Muslim Brotherhood operative who was subsequently convicted of working with Muammar Gaddafi. And by the way, you laid all of this out brilliantly last year in one of your multiple chalkboard demonstrations. But just to recall, what Khalid Safouri's boss, Abdurrahman al-Amoudi, also was doing during this same period, where we subsequently learned is raising funds for Al-Qaeda. And Khalid Safouri, with Grover Norquist's help, became the Muslim outreach coordinator for the George W. Bush campaign and went on to help engineer relationships between not only Abdurrahman al-Amoudi but other top Islamists like Sami al-Arian, a very dangerous guy, also convicted of terrorism. And Grover worked with a number of different instances. But here's the point, and I think this sounds to some people, including an NRA panel that looked at all this, to be ancient history. Stale charges, we're told.
Wow.
No such thing as
stale charges. Stale charges goes directly to, I think it's a year. The NRA has a deal. If the charges have been out for a year and nothing's happened, then they're called stale charges. It's not that these are just old news. They have a policy that they have to classify them as stale charges if it's over a year. Right. And they're trying to make sure that people just don't go in and pick people off on the board of directors of the NRA. But the truth is, this guy should have no place near the NRA.
The guy says all the right things to conservatives. I remember when he was on with you, Glenn, when Norquist was here in the studio, and he doesn't remember certain people. He explains them away pretty well. Although he stammered and stuttered through that interview. But, when it comes to talking about the country, he says things like, I believe the right to liberty is divinely inspired. He says George Washington is his favorite political figure. So people, I think, have a hard time believing that he's who he is.
What people have to understand is, do we all agree that the United States is grossly off track, and it started with George W. Bush when it comes to the Muslim Brotherhood and Islamists. Do we all agree that we have people in our own government that are telling us to shut up, that we shouldn't look at these mosques because you're being a racist? Do we all agree on that? That that's wrong, that we know that our government is off track? And it started with George W. Bush. Now, there's extra stuff that has been going on because I believe this administration is sympathetic to a lot of the Islamist ideas and ideals. But George W. Bush, he wasn't a traitor. He wasn't trying to get us all killed or anything like that. The reason is because Grover Norquist is the guy who has been introducing and bringing to the table at CPAC, NRA, brings to the table these Islamists who have been, clean hands. And with his endorsement, he opens up the doors in Washington, and it is extraordinarily dangerous. Frank, I want to thank you so much for being on. We have all of the information at glennbeck.com/SaveTheNRA. You have to vote if you're a lifetime member or a 5-year member. You have to vote yes by May 1st. This audience can make the difference on this one. I don't think there's ever been a recall at the NRA. And a lot of people aren't paying attention, and a lot of people will say, well, I'm not really sure. We do. We have done our homework. We've spent a lot of money on investigation. Frank has been investigating this guy. We have Joe Schmitz, who was on TV with me last night. He's the Inspector General of the Pentagon. He is the most honorable man I've ever met. Really honorable. He was the guy who represented the listener of ours at the NRA, at this, court, if you will, at the NRA, to get this ballot to go through. He has looked at all of these things. James Woolsey from the CIA, he also says Grover Norquist is extraordinarily dangerous. I urge you, go and get your ballot from your rifleman. Go get your ballot in your magazine from the NRA if you're a lifetime or 5-year member, and vote yes to recall Grover Norquist.